Good evening, everyone. I hope everyone is having a safe evening. My name is Lee Pfeffer, and I am the manager of museum experience here at the Glbt Historical Society. And I'm so glad that everyone is joining us for tonight's event, or whatever time it is from wherever you are joining us for this virtual streaming program. Before we start everything tonight, I'm going to be giving you a little bit of information about the Historical Society and the work that we do, but I wanted to start by acknowledging that the Glbt Historical Society is based on unceded Ohlone tribal land. I invite any Indigenous folks with us today. You're going to be hearing from a group of folks, as well as I hope that there are lots of folks watching the program. I invite any Indigenous folks to make themselves visible in the chat and be recognized as we honor the contemporary and ancestral lives of America's Indigenous peoples. This event is being recorded tonight, so if you can't make it live for this evening, we are happy to have you watch afterwards. We're going to post it on our YouTube channel and our website. And if you are watching live with us, we encourage everyone and welcome your active participation in the chat. I encourage you to post questions, comments, observations for our speakers, and we'll be kind of taking all those for a Q&A at the end of the program. Before I turn it over to tonight's host and moderator, Londa Lakes, I want to give you all a little bit of information about the Historical Society if you're not familiar with our work. We were founded in 1985, and we are internationally recognized as a leader in the field of LGBTQ public history. The Glbt Historical Society's mission is to collect, preserve, exhibit, and make accessible to the public materials and knowledge to support and promote understanding of LGBTQ history, culture, and arts in all of their diversity. We have two centers of operations. We have the Glbt Historical Society Museum, which is where I'm streaming from right now. We're located in the heart of the Castro at 18th Street between Castro and Collingwood. And the museum is open for people to come and visit, so I encourage you to check us out. And we also have the Dr. John P. DeCecco Archives and Research Center in the Mid-Market District. You can check out our growing array of exhibitions, events, and archival resources online at glbthistory.org. We have a lot of really wonderful resources that we've been putting together and making accessible to everyone online during the pandemic, which we will continue to do. There are some really wonderful primary source sets that just went up recently, so those will be really fun to check out. And finally, I really want to thank all of our members and donors who make our work possible. If you're not already a card-carrying member of the Glbt Historical Society, I invite you to consider joining. You get a whole bunch of different wonderful perks, including free admission to the membership for yourself and a guest anytime that we are open, as well as free access to our events. You get invited to special members-only events as well, and you get a 20% discount in the store. And for the holidays, we are offering actually an extra 5% to all of our members in the physical museum store, as well as our online store. So if you've got some holiday shopping you want to get done and you want to support the society, consider becoming a member. You'll get a nice discount. You can learn how to become a member or other ways that you can support the society by visiting glbthistory.org/join-give. And I'll be hopping off in just a second, but I wanted to let everybody know a little bit about the program that we're doing tonight and to introduce our wonderful moderator. So we're doing this program in honor of both Native American Heritage Month as well as Transgender Awareness Week, which is this week. And so we're bringing together a panel of folks who identify as Two-Spirit to come together for a conversation about the rich complexity of Two-Spirit identity. We're going to be, they, not me, will be exploring different ways that Two-Spirit folks construct identities through tribal affiliation, as well as Western LGBT terminology, and the ways in which queerness in Indigenous communities has been historically defined and understood, and how traditions are being maintained and updated for current times. So I would really love to introduce you to our moderator tonight, Landa Lakes, also known as Jamiko Thomas. She is on the board of Bates and is the Council of Grand Dukes and Duchesses of San Francisco. She's also a former board member of the GLBT Historical Society, and she's going to be serving as our moderator for the evening. So let me bring up Landa. Hello.
Hello, Chokana, Sahuchikoat, Nico Thomas. I'm Mintik Tupelo, Chikisha Saya, and I'm coming to you actually from Oklahoma, traditional homelands of the Chickasaw Nation. And so one of the things that I really appreciate is that the GLBT Historical Society allows platforms for this in order for us to educate people about the history that we're going to talk about tonight. And it is rather complex when you think about Two-Spirit issues and the Two-Spirit issues, especially around contemporary Two-Spirits. And so I'm really looking forward to getting into this. But one of the ways that we usually introduce ourselves as Indigenous people is we often like to introduce ourselves because we want to tell people not only our own identification, but like where we come from. And I know it's more of a Western concept to tell people what you do for a living, but we don't really do that. What we do is we tell where we're from. And so I'm going to go. Let's hear from Amelia.
Hello, my name is Amelia Vigil. My heritage is Pequot's Pueblo, northern New Mexico on my father's side, and Putapechin, raised Chicano on my mother's side.
Thank you, Amelia. Sam Campbell.
Hi, everybody. My name's Sam Campbell. I'm Apache and Navajo, and I'm calling in today from Ramaytush land. And I'm just really excited to be here with all of you and share our stories.
Yes, and our last panelist will be Fawn Harjo.
Hello, I'm Fawn Harjo. I'm Muskogee Creek in Chickasaw, and I was born and raised in Oklahoma, southeastern Oklahoma, and I live in San Francisco now.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we're going to start off. We're going to start off with the big question. Something that everybody's always interested in is, historicity, history. So I wanted to start off by saying, Two-Spirits played important roles in their societies. So right now I'm giving each of you a chance to talk like maybe about the roles that Two-Spirit people played in the past. And we're just going to popcorn this. So I'm going to move it over to Amelia first. You won't always be first, Amelia, but for now, it seems like you are.
Yeah, well, I mean, I definitely know the role of healer, but also bridge, whether that be a communication bridge or holding a third space within communities. So outside of the binary that we see in dominant culture today. And I'll pause and pass it to who's ever next.
Fawn, would you like to speak on this?
Yeah, well, I feel as though I don't know a ton about the history of our queer people, but I feel as though that I've heard a number of known Two-Spirits who are medicine people, leaders, led strategies for battles, those things, all over the place.
And Sam?
Yeah, from my understanding, from my teachings, from my elders, is Two-Spirit people historically have been caregivers and healers and lovers and fighters and everything that anyone can be. And our love and sacredness comes from our ability to hold these energies in a way that other people cannot. And so while we are like lovers, fighters, healers, the same as everybody else, it's in a different way. It's in a more sacred way, and like Amelia said, like a bridge, you know, and we hold that medicine in everything we do.
Yes, thank you. You know, it brings an interesting subject up, especially some of the things that Fawn said about not really, you know, being that aware of the history. So let's talk about that for a minute. Why do you think that this part of Native history has sort of been sort of like darkened out, you know, not really talked about, absent from many history studies? Why do you think that is?
I'd be glad to talk on that first. Um, I think historically it comes down to a lot of like obviously like colonization, right? But specifically the colonization that had to do with religion, because while there are the stories of the Spaniards rounding up two-spirit people and like having dogs kill them, you know, it's real, it's documented history. It was also like internalized genocide of our own people, because it was either you convert to our religion or we kill you. And so converting to Western religions was a way for our ancestors to continue to live and to allow us now who are here to live. But what came with that was learning to be ashamed of the things that we used to honor. So when we have things and people like Two Spirit and gay people, and it is natural within our Indigenous communities, when we're taught to demonize that, like almost literally, like it is seen in some cultures as demonic, like then we are stripped of that sacredness, we're stripped of those histories, we're stripped of those identities. And that follows us into where we are now. And now that we're in a space where a lot of us are safer in a safe space to explore our identities and explore our histories, we're able to like see these stories and read about it and listen to ancestors and these stories that are passed down in a new way. And it allows us to start pulling it out of the dark, as you kind of put it, Lana. And so, yeah, I think it comes back to that forced religion and the apparent genocide of our people.
Thank you, Sam. Amelia, Fawn, do either of you have something to add?
One of the things I was thinking about definitely was Christianity, Christian scholars, things of that sort relating to religion, but also not having a lot of history almost at all in the first place due to the boarding schools and assimilation, and a lot of all of that information and history being lost because it was oral tradition and not many people kind of were able to pass on all the information through colonization.
Thank you, Amelia. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add is around the piece of that it has been strategized, that, you know, part of dominant culture strategy is to separate us from our deep knowing and our dreaming abilities. And when we dream, we can also, you know, pull ourselves towards those visions. And that is a strength within people and within communities. And so I would just say that it is not a mistake, like, oh, this was like left out of history. I would say that this was strategically, purposefully encouraging people not to feel the realities of the atrocities that continue today. And I think all of that is around the shift in distraction, wanting to distract people from feeling grief for the realities that happen to that could have happened and continue to happen today. to Two-Spirit people and people who don't fit within the gender binary and within the dominant culture and religious expectations.
You know, one of the things that I think about when I think on this subject too is how a lot of times we think, oh, history's been erased and so forth, but then it's left to like anthropologists or people who are just writing things about their experience among, you know, Native people for the first time and everything, that we can really garner a lot of information from about Two-Spirit people. I'll never forget that George Catlin, of course, captured this infamous painting that he calls the Dance of the Berdache. And even though he captured that moment of that Two-Spirit person, as we identify it now, even though he captured that, he still had the comment that he hoped that this disgusting practice would disappear. You know, and then we got the same thing from like this explorer named Jacques going up the Mississippi River. And as he traveled up the Mississippi River, he came across all these people that had Two-Spirit people within their communities. And again, it was something that he thought was a deplorable practice from his perspective as a Christian. And even though these are negative experiences that they happen to have during this whole time of explorers and so forth, the thing that rings true to me is that they captured it. Even though it was a negative thing, they captured it, and it reminds us that yes, this is a part of our history, and it's an important part of our history. So I'm going to go into not history anymore. Let's talk about the current. Let's talk about where exactly. Let's talk about where exactly we are at in the Two-Spirit community today. So we're going to start first with Fawn.
Fawn, would you like to?
I'm sorry. I was slightly distracted by the other audio. Can you repeat that?
So sorry about that. I'm asking you about the current roles of Two-Spirit people.
Current roles of Two-Spirit people. I feel as though in all the interactions I've had within my community, a lot has been mentorship, caregiving a lot, and kind of passing on that knowledge and taking other Two-Spirited people within our families under our wing to teach them about our history and how to love themselves and having a place within our own community.
All right, and Amelia, tell me a little bit about the roles that Two-Spirit people currently play in modern society.
Yeah, I think Two-Spirit people play many roles, and we see a lot of, in going off of what Fawn just said, there are Two-Spirit people in nursing, they're doctors, they're scholars, they're artists, they're dancers, they're intellectuals, and we see that Two-Spirit people gather together, like for instance in GLBT communities, but also spread wide out and interact with everyone. And that's a beautiful piece about some of that medicine that Sam was speaking to in terms of the roles that people play. And that I think with Two-Spirit people, there's really no limit to who they are in modern society. It's how we dream ourselves to be.
That is beautifully put. Sam, do you want to comment on that? I know that I think Sam, didn't you do a whole like TED talk over Two-Spirit people in modern society?
I did my TED talk on Indigenous histories and missing and murdered Indigenous women, but Two-Spirit people came up like in the conversation. But that's actually like a really good example of Two-Spirit people today are, and again, pulling like what Amelia said, like acting as this bridge. And so it is our communities and the way that we're interacting, not only within like our own indigenous spaces, but also out in the world, we're forcing communities like the LGBT community to focus back in on indigenous issues, right? Because like we need to be included in LGBT spaces because like we belong there, right? This is also our space. This is our right, you know, to be here and to exist happily and safely. But in order to do that, you need to be aware of what it means to have like indigenous people in your space. And so we are a very good step for a lot of people to have to like face that for the first time. And that shouldn't be our job, but unfortunately it kind of sometimes becomes that, which is a big reason why people look for LGBT spaces of color. But when we look at the way that we have evolved, it really mirrors the same things that we were doing then. We're still the medicine. We're still bridging people. We're pulling people back together. We're doing a wonderful job of bringing tradition back into like a sacred space, not a colonized space. And it's just take the Bates powwow, for example, like having this a literal, in this instance, like literal space, this room full of people who have all come together for this like union of happiness and celebration of like who we are as people. Like that's healing, that's medicine that we're putting out into that world. And so yeah, with whatever we're doing, we are healing, we're celebrating, and we're loving.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, about healing and celebrating and so forth, because this is Trans Awareness Week as well. So I'd like you to talk about from your own experiences, specifically around trans and the community. Let's talk about how the community has either embraced or excluded the trans community. So actually, this time let's start with Sam, and we'll sort of like pop around after that.
Yeah. The example that I always come to when I talk about this is I was talking on another panel. This is in the before times when it was in person. And it was on Indigenous representation in television, right? And I was so excited. It was the first in-person panel I was going to be in, like at a convention. It was like I had a badge. It was like so cool. And we get there and we're all sitting down and we're introducing ourselves one after the other. And my friend introduced themselves like, I'm Two-Spirit, blah, blah, blah. My name is this. And then I'm like, I'm also Two-Spirit and we're doing this. The person next to me says, I don't believe in Two-Spirit people. And this was in front of a whole room on a panel about Indigenous representation after two very real like Two-Spirit people were sitting next to her, you know. And so there's still a lot of internalized hatred and disrespect for the trans and Two-Spirit community because of those ingrained teachings and practices of learning to demonize. And some, not all Indigenous communities loved and accepted Two-Spirit people in the way that like we're talking, like that, like any other society in the world, there were definitely groups that were not accepting. But what's great with the idea of Two-Spirit is that we're pulling it away from like individualized people into like, this is our community, this is our Indigenous space that we're going to work towards like asserting into these spaces. And so we're still experiencing so much pushback. Dancers refusing to come to the Two-Spirit powwow, like drummers refusing to want to drum if there's going to be Two-Spirit people dancing, or like even just women, if women are going to have a drum there, they won't drum, they won't dance, you know. So there's still a lot of internalized stuff that our people are having to like work through. And so unfortunately, like there are not unfortunately in this instance, but there are spaces that are doing great, that are like reaching out and like wanting to do better. But unfortunately, there are a lot of spaces that are still unwilling to do that work.
Amelia?
Yeah. Thank you, Sam. That was really well said. I think, one thing that has come in my time, especially within the Bates community and the Two-Spirit powwow, is the work being, having multiplicity in it. So here we are within non-Native communities talking about indigeneity, and then here we are within Native communities being faced with homophobia and erasure of our gender nonconforming identities, with people just really not being willing to use they them pronouns, although that's exceedingly US centric, but it is this reality. And I have heard different opinions around even the term Two-Spirit, and being relatively very young of a term that is really around visibility for people to kind of collect under, like a term for shelter to collect under, that isn't specific to a particular language or tribe. And I've heard others say, Two-Spirit isn't just a synonym for LGBTQ, and Native American Indian. There is, or Indigenous identified individual. For some it is, and for others it's not. And I think that one thing I'd like to add in this is the reality of I've always been taught that Two-Spirit is a term for Two-Spirit people by Two-Spirit people, and a layer on top of that is to claim Two-Spirit identity is also to be accountable to your community, and to show up within your community, however that is defined for you as an individual. And so I think that has something that has a place in this conversation, right? Around, I think I'll stop there, but I just wanted to add that.
All right, let's hear now from Fawn.
My relocating from Oklahoma to San Francisco was not an accident. It was very much purposeful because of the exclusion of trans people within those spaces. I didn't know anything about Two-Spirit people growing up in Oklahoma until I was a teenager, and I luckily had someone very close and important to me be able to come to me and talk about those things. Outside that, I had no information. I didn't know anything about it, and I wasn't going to know any of those things. If I brought I had brought it up to my father at one point, asking if he was aware of this information, and he said that it was not true, it was not real, and it was some sort of, I don't know, like fake news kind of thing. It didn't happen, and it was some sort of white propaganda to like divide Native people. It was a very strange argument, but following that, and then other people in my family who had the similar reaction of saying, no, this is not what it was, whether they have any sort of information, any background information about any of these things, and they didn't. And I have to say, I've experienced more exclusion than the inclusion. The only inclusion I ever remember seeing was whenever I started seeing it when I was 16, and I went to my first Two-Spirit gathering in Oklahoma in Osage Hills, and it was really life-changing for me. But that was the only space I had ever seen that was including trans people, because it was all Two-Spirit people. And pushback from other people within the communities is a lot, but I'm trying to remember where I'm going here. Anyways, yeah, not really seeing. Oh, the Miko somewhere in Oklahoma. There's a stomp ground. I can't remember which one it is. I don't think it's mine, but the last thing I heard is there was a new Miko who had excluded all trans female dancers from shaking shells, and his word is that's it. So they can't shake shells, anything like that. No two-spirit people are able to dance at that stomp ground at this point.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify for people who are outside of the southeastern culture, you may not know this, but Amiko is sort of like the chief or the leader of that stomp ground. So when Fawn was referring to Amiko, that's what he's referring to. He's talking about the leader of that particular stomp ground, and that particular stomp ground used to allow trans women to shake shells, but after the leader passed away, then the new Miko that was brought in changed position on that. So trans women are no longer allowed to shake shells. They can still come to the stomp dance, but they are not allowed to shake shells. And this is some of the ways that we can see sometimes there is exclusionary practices that are still existing currently in today's world. One of the things that one of the things that I would like to really define too is shaking shells. It is it's a part of Southeastern culture. When you do a stomp dance, the music that is created in three ways. It's through singing. It's also through a shell rattle, and it's also through shakers that are on the women's legs. They can be turtle shell shakers, or they can be deer toes, or they can be cans. And we take the cans and put rocks in them. And so when you hear the rhythmic shaking, then that's what it is. So that creates the whole music for the stomp dance to take place. And I would also like to throw out this one little piece that I thought was very interesting too. There have been times when we have a two-spirit gathering or something, and when somebody comes, then some of their own elders might come along with them because they want to come along and check it out and make sure that it's traditional and it's like a safe it's like a safe place. And for the most part, those who do attend, they see that everything that we do as two-spirit people fall within line with tradition. So I just wanted to put that little piece out there. But you know what? Amelia brought up a really good point, and I sort of want to go back to that. Amelia was talking about the definition of two-spirit, and two-spirit can have like multiple definitions. It doesn't. It's not a monolith. It doesn't just have like one small definition. But another thing that's being really tossed around a lot, especially online, is indigiqueer. So let's talk about that for a moment. Some people identify as indigiqueer. Some people identify as two-spirit. So let's talk a little bit about that. What's your thoughts on it, Amelia?
Okay. You see me shaking my head, I see. Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that. I think what I'll share though is, that I feel my sense is that it's very generational, that it's, potentially millennials trying to find their voice and their visibility and choose in power by empowering themselves through change in terminology. And I also see it as, just wanting to be respectful of claiming two-spirit in a way that isn't contributing to the erasure of trans people. And I'll stop there.
All right, Sam, what's your thoughts? Indigiqueer versus Two-Spirit.
Yeah, I was actually talking about this the other day. So for me, the way that I came to understand Two-Spirit is that you hold two spirits, right? You're holding both feminine and masculine energies inside yourself. And so, like, using Western terms, that feels very like trans or non-binary, right? So, like, for a long time, that's how I equated it in my brain, was Two-Spirit equals like gender nonconforming, like any type of gender nonconforming. But the greater community was also using it to mean like gay, lesbian, bi, all of that. And so it was very confusing to me at first. And I'm feeling like, from the people that I'm talking with who use Indigiqueer, is that that term is now for queer, bi, gay, lesbian, like all these other identities, because there are, lesbians, gay men, all of the bisexuals who don't feel that they hold both energies, right? Who feel very much like they hold one. Um, and like Amelia said, like, don't want to claim that Two-Spirit identity because that's not who they are. And so it, in the same way that, like, I would say that, again, using like the Western terms, like I would say like I'm non-binary, but like I wouldn't say like I'm agender or whatever, right? Like there's a word that makes sense for me. And so I feel like for a lot of people, Two-Spirit does not feel correct. And so Indigiqueer is another like overarching umbrella term, in the same way that we just use queer community. Like I'm queer, I'm Indigiqueer, and it's that ability to like say like I am Indigenous and queer, but I don't want to claim that extra sacred space that like I don't feel like is mine. That's how I'm interpreting it. That's how my friends are kind of like explaining it, their experiences to me too. Like my ideas definitely are not like the correct way. That's what I'm experiencing right now. Yeah.
Thank you, Sam. Vaughn, how about you?
Thank you, Sam. That was really clear and concise in your explanation of that, because I personally don't really have any sort of connection to Indigiqueer. I've seen it used. I have not had anyone ask me about it, or I haven't talked about it in any sort of way, and I guess I just kind of assumed it was something that people are using as a something they could kind of switch back and forth between Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer. I don't have any particular thoughts on Indigiqueer. The way that I understood Two-Spiritness was, I was taught that there was a male and female spirit, and you held both those spirits. And as I got older, I too was like, this is a very colonial description of how we exist when we exist outside of that settler terminology and language. And the closest you could kind of get was non-conforming or trans. And then even with that, I saw someone explain something about trans being a colonial settler term within itself, because we existed without those terms for so long. I see Two-Spiritness as, I identify as Two-Spirit, and I see it as trying to explain to other people in a settler way. There's a male and female spirit. You host both of those, but by having both of those, you're neither. And that's kind of how I've understood it for myself.
Thank you. That's really well said. One of the things that I've thought about quite often when we're dealing with people who often refer to themselves as Indigiqueer instead of Two-Spirit, and of course this is just different ways of people recognizing themselves, or saying this is me. So it's not like there's no criteria that someone has to meet to like feel certain things. But I think a lot of people do feel like Two-Spirit does have criteria, that it does have like this feeling of you must have spirituality mixed in there, you must have like a political bent or a political activist. sort of personality that comes with it. So I think that a lot of times when people see Two-Spirit, sometimes they're a little overwhelmed by the term, and rather than claiming indigiqueer sort of identifies you as indigenous, but doesn't really place you in that sort of activist moment. But actually, speaking of which, this is a good time to actually talk about social media, for instance. Social media, you see posts on hashtags on Two-Spirit and so forth. So let's talk about people who can use the term Two-Spirit. It's quite often co-opted by people who are non-native, non-indigenous. So let's talk about that. What are your thoughts on that, Sam?
Looking for the unmute button. It's really interesting to me how badly other people want to be indigenous until it matters, you know? And I think the first one I ever heard about was actually Jason Mraz, like trying to explain, like using Two-Spirit but meaning bisexual. It was really weird. And so that was the first time I had even heard the word Two-Spirit. And because I was hearing it in communities where they were like saying like, isn't this like wild that this guy is using our term? And I was like, what term? And so it's weird that my introduction to like this identity that I now hold like so close to me was because somebody else was co-opting it. This is, as Amelia said, this is a word for Two-Spirit people, by Two-Spirit people, and I truly feel that the criteria for using like Two-Spirit as a term for yourself is you got to be indigenous, and you got to like understand, I think, because there's a lot of people who are indigenous but aren't empathetic to like the histories of this stuff, right? So like people want to claim all this stuff but aren't ready to deal with what comes with it. And so I think when it becomes like I'm indigenous but only for this moment, for people who are not connected to their community at all, like it's complicated because like I don't want to like support blood quantum. Like that's not anything that I ever want to like promote, right? So saying like, well, you have to be X amount indigenous, like doesn't make sense. But like you have to, like, Two-Spirit is so sacred and so important, and it's medicine and it's this and it's that, that like if you don't have that understanding at least of the connection, like it feels I don't want to say empty, but it feels different and it feels a little off, you know? So I think as long as you're indigenous and you're holding yourself in a good way, you know, like use what makes you feel right. But yeah, it's a word for indigenous folks.
Thank you, Sam. One of the things I would like to clarify for everyone too, especially if you're listening and you may not be aware of what blood quantum means. Basically, it's a practice that the U.S. government has of calculating how much native blood you have. So that's why you quite often hear people talk about fractions when they're relating to their native heritage. Somebody will say that they're an eighth, somebody will say they're a 16th, somebody will say that they're half. These are all because that's how we are counted by the U.S. It is through our blood. The only people that are counted through our blood. Different tribes do it in different ways, but federally speaking, it is done through these fractions. So when you go through the BIA to be federally recognized, you will have a fraction. You will be a fraction somewhere. Fawn, would you like to speak a little bit about the co-opting of the word Two-Spirit?
I think that maybe in my early 20s is whenever I was aware that it had been co-opted by a number of people within a queer community, and just what I had heard is just a number of white people that were wanting to use it. And I've also come to contact with some of these people myself, and some people who are just completely unaware as to why it's sacred and why they should not be using it, and wanting to know specifically from me what my thoughts are or something. And I don't know, it seems so strange because I feel as though if there's a general consensus to not use it if you're not native, you I don't know why you would have to go to individuals at this point to try to ask other people in whatever way, is this okay, when it's been known that it's not okay. And a lot of people have different definitions of what that means to be two-spirit. So I will leave them, native people, I will leave that up to them to define what that means. But I do not believe that you're able to use it if you're a non-native. And I think that there's so many, this kind of goes back to Sam talking about people really just wanting to be indigenous. There are so many other cultures and words and languages, and there's so much else going on in the world that I do not understand why people cannot go out of their way to look into their own histories and their own backgrounds and their own cultures to find something or make something, and why they have to feels like continually pick apart things and take things.
That's called colonization, I think. Anyway, Amelia, what's your thoughts?
Yeah. So many. I, I think it's very important for me to acknowledge that I'm, not a culture keeper of my heritage, and how sticky and sometimes complex that, and definitely, layered that is to work within the communities that I do, and to be so reticent to be told I'm not enough, and because of my being raised not within my culture, or not being raised by my elders, but I have worked a lot in interrupting, at least through the Bates organization, and interrupting people, to what Fawn was speaking to, asking our organization for permission to use the term. And this kind of circles me back to say, to what Sam was speaking to, which is, you must, this sounds really like Lord of the Rings, you must claim yourself. I don't mean that. I just mean to know who you are, to know your heritage, to know your culture, is different for everyone, for our unique walks, our unique souls. And if you are seeking permission, then already there's a dynamic that it doesn't feel right, that it's not for you, or there's an insecurity there. And I'm a person who really found my two-spirit identity through internalized homophobia and the dominant culture almost taking my spirit, breaking my spirit, making me feel that I wasn't worth walking this earth anymore. And through that, through those hardships, I claimed who I truly am, and dug into my family and looked into our who we are, and showed up in the best way that I can, and continue to, recognizing that at any moment I will step away in order to empower others to show up and do that work. And I think that's a piece that is, we're kind of tiptoeing around colonization and the idea, the wanting to take without reciprocity, without actually giving anything back, that conquering that negative connotation to claiming, which is about mine. and without any thought of what that is or where that exchange is, that true deep soul exchange. I feel like I'm going on a tangent, but yeah. So Two-Spirit being co-opted is something that I interrupt a lot, in the work that I do, but also, go round and round within myself, as being raised in dominant culture and separate from my community. And I've made the choice to be honest and vulnerable, and say what I do know and what I don't know. And try and encourage people to really, actually, Londa, you taught me the definition of discernment. And so, what it is to discern, not just in our minds, but in our hearts and our spirits and within our epigenetics to our DNA. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Amelia. That's lovely. I love discernment, by the way. I think discernment is like a perfect word. And I just sort of want to backtrack for just a moment and talk a little bit about, like, the reason that the Two-Spirit powwow was even created was because of this sometimes feeling left out, even within the Native community. And we always talk about roles of Two-Spirit people, and it was a way to give back to our community. But at the same time, it's also a way of asserting ourselves back into our own culture and saying, yes, this is ours too. And I think that's a very important moment for people to really reflect on, is that as Two-Spirit people, we offer things to the community, but out of that offering of community, we also demand respect as well, because we should be respected. We're people, we're humans, and we were always a part of our tribes and our nations. And it's very important for people to update their thinking from colonialism and sort of move away from that. And that's really what my next question is really all about. It's about allyship. There's many people who are on here, and I see several Native people that are actually online too. I'm glad to see you all. There's several Indigenous people, and I'm really happy that they're here. But there's also people that are not Indigenous, and they often want to show allyship. So this question is a little more complicated. How can people show allyship to the Indigenous community, or specifically the Two-Spirit trans siblings that we have? And we're going to start this off by going first to Sam, because Sam blinked first.
That's wonderful. I just want you to know that I'm taking notes as this is going. Like, you're all speaking gold. Like, I'm like, oh, I gotta remember this for my class. This is great. I think a lot of what we as Two-Spirit folks, and I guess mostly like any minority, come up against is performative practices, right? Like, we hung up a Two-Spirit flag at this thing and we're great. Like, we support you, but you don't do, there's no land acknowledgement. There's no just general acknowledgement that Indigenous people exist at your thing. There's no, there's whatever, right? I think what we need out of allyship is first compassion and understanding. We're tired. Most of our existence is education, towards others. And so, same like you would do with any other minority status, take that on for yourself, educate yourself. Don't put the burden onto us to teach you. But in the big moments, understand that there are cultural differences. We are, let's say, in a community queer center, right? And there are Two-Spirit people here and there are non-Two-Spirit people here. The things that are helpful to Two-Spirit people may be very different than what's helpful to anybody in another community, because like our medicine is different, our ways of like understanding grief and sorrow and like our healthy coping mechanisms, it's all different, right? And so I think the best thing to do is like when you have friends, you know, you can open up the conversation, because you know people like say like, hey, do you have the energy for this, like is this okay, you know, and you can have those conversations. If you're organizing an event, I would definitely say you need Indigenous Two-Spirit folks on whatever like committee you have going on. If your hope is to be inclusive, like you should have like anybody that you hope to include in your thing, you should have them in your planning committee. But especially like just whose land are you on? You know, have people from those communities like coming to you. So I want like just to encourage people to like move away from like performative allyship and move more into like that like caring, compassion, and understanding that goes beyond a Facebook post here and there, you know, goes beyond a hashtag, goes towards like donating, goes towards showing up to events is amazing, because like it shows us that people care, and it shows the community that people care. Like if nobody showed up to the first Bates powwow, like we probably wouldn't be here still doing this, right? But so many people needed that and came together and showed the love and support. And like the amount of people that show up today and aren't even like in the Two-Spirit community, like they come to support us, they come to like show us that they care. So there, you can show up in small ways and you can show up in big ways. And so I think that's really what we need out of allyship.
Thank you. Wow, you covered that really, really well. I don't know if anybody has anything. So I do. Okay, Amelia, please.
Oh, I mean, agreed. That was really well said. I think the only way that I try around allyship is to, you know, really shift that gaze. Like, I don't know if you all have experienced this, but when someone finds out that you're Indigenous or involved in a Two-Spirit community, their eyes are like, ah, you know, and there's that like glitter and like, you know, that little like kind of like succubus energy that comes through, and, you know, and you're like, hold on now. And I think that I try and encourage individuals to put that energy less externally onto others around that, you know, tell me I need to know kind of vibe, and turn it inside themselves and say, well, can you come with that much? Can you come with that towards yourself, towards your people, towards learning your ancestry, even all the different various pieces that they may be in the mixtures of individuals, and try and tell people that, you know, in a supremacist culture, in a white supremacist culture and dominant culture that we live in, not having to name your whiteness is part of the privilege, and having it be the assumed epitome of like whatever, you know, that stuff. And so I find myself having enjoying it when people name themselves, and name where they are from, instead of just assuming that isn't worth sharing. Or to your point, Londa, in our intro, you know, like people want to run off their resumes, and I have zero interest in knowing somebody's resume. You know, like, okay, you pay your bills, lucky you, but, you know, who are you is really more of the way that I want to connect. So I guess that's all I had to add.
Absolutely. So let's go now into some of the questions and answers. So they have the questions. Do we have the answers? That's the big question. So one of the comments has been that Tilly has experienced, you know, racism and oppression, and you know, within the LGBT community, and so their big question is, you know, here, I'll just read it. So I'm wondering if you have ever had positive experiences in a community that accepted all aspects of your intersectional identities.
Yeah, dates. Like, honestly, that was, I think, the first time that I like walked into a space and was like, I could breathe, you know? Like, I didn't have to worry about like my pronouns. I didn't have to worry about like if I could sit at the drum, if I can walk over here, you know, like it's this sense of relief. And like, of course, there are individuals who will like welcome you with open arms, you know, like no questions asked, love you unconditionally. But it's so difficult to find that community, that like a group of people that are willing to do that. And you know, it's becoming more common with like younger folks. And like it's really weird that like I'm technically like parent age now. And so like when I'm thinking younger folks, I'm thinking like my like friends, and we're like parent age. So I guess it's yeah. But it's really like it's shifting, which I'm really excited for, because there's a lot of young like two-spirit folks that are like finding these spaces as their first spaces, and they don't have to deal with the stuff that we had to deal with, and that makes me so happy. And so like even though like my answer to this is like no, you know, I didn't have those experiences until I found Bates. Like it makes me happy to know that that's not going to be always the case coming up in the future.
Does anybody else have an answer to that?
The Two-Spirit gathering, whenever I went when I was 16, that was the first place that I went that I felt immediately at home, have always felt at home, always felt safe, and still do. And the powwow also, it's hard for other people who have that blind spot, who are trying to do all the good work, but have that blind spot and are not aware. The people that are going to be the most aware and sensitive and understanding are the people who share that identity, I feel. And I especially felt that going to any and all of the Two-Spirit gatherings at the powwow.
Amelia, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would agree. Bates and then the International Two-Spirit Gathering are both two spaces where I felt complete. And the only one I would add is when I'm alone in nature, and in particularly on my ancestral homelands, when I'm alone there. People freak me out, you know, but nature never does. Animals don't. And I feel fully accepted there too.
I'm one of those people that I think that I sort of no matter what space I go into, I force my identity on you. Not where I feel like I'm ashamed or embarrassed to say who I am or what I am. So I've been forcing that on people for a while. So really felt like, you know, this great sense of community and so forth was probably up at the Osage Reservation when we did Osage Hills. I think that even though I was around the Two-Spirit organizations for a while, it wasn't really until a moment that I was at Osage Hills that things just sort of like really clicked, and I felt like the community was there for everybody, and it wasn't just like this narrow little thing, but it was open to everybody. And I think that's what really gave us hope when we first started organizing the Two-Spirit powwow, was things like this where we were able to go in and express who we are, and not be shamed for it, but to be welcomed and embraced. That's what the Two-Spirit powwow really is. It's a welcoming space. It welcomes everybody. You don't even have to be Indigenous to come to the Two-Spirit powwow. You don't have to be LGBTQ or anything to, or, you know, asexual. Nothing matters. You know, you come and you enjoy our culture, the culture of our community. And I can't stress that more than anything else, is a welcoming space is something that you'll never forget. Never forget. We're going to go ahead and answer another one of these questions, and this one comes in: how can people best support land back initiatives, and are there initiatives that focus on specifically supporting Two-Spirit community members? That's really tough, especially if it's under the phrase of land back, specifically, because we don't have any like Two-Spirit land initiatives. That does sound really nice. I would love to have a Two-Spirit land initiative. But one of the things I will say about activism and the fight is Two-Spirit people are always there. Even during the Dakota Access Pipeline, there was a whole encampment of Two-Spirit people. They were fighting. They called themselves Two-Spirit Nation, and they were there fighting too. So you can always see that Two-Spirit people are really trying to give back to their community in many different ways. And I think that it's really great when being there at the Dakota Access Pipeline, they were pulled into it, and they felt compelled to go. And then there they all were together, and they were able to form a camp themselves. And it did sort of remind me of some of the stories that people used to tell of exploring the Americas, where Two-Spirit people would often set up their camp. There'd be a women's camp, a men's camp, and then there'd be this other camp. And so I thought, wow, in some ways, this is reflecting tradition. But if anybody can answer that question, please do. I don't really have an answer to it, especially focusing specifically on Two-Spirit community members.
I think specifically for land back initiatives, I think a big thing right now is sharing on social media and opening up conversations with people, because so many people just assume that land back means like, okay, everybody go now. Like we got this. Okay, thanks, bye. Or like, this is ours now. You're under our rules now, and that's not what it is, right? Like, ideally maybe, but like realistically, like what we're asking for is like the Ohlone people want the rights back to tend to the land the way it needs to be tended to, right? Like we need to start doing these like controlled forest burns again, so that way we're not dealing with these California wildfires every year, right? Our land back initiatives are, we want treaty rights back. We want to be able to hunt on our lands. We want our Inuit people to be able to hunt seal in order to eat, right? Like there are things that come with land that aren't just ownership, because to us, land wasn't about ownership. It's about the way that we use and interact with the land. And so I think helping shift that conversation from like, it's not us saying like, we need all the property rights now, like, it's bigger than that. It's more personal, like individualized, like more personal, because we shouldn't be only able to do these kinds of things on our reservations, right? Like most people on their reses aren't on their ancestral lands, like we should be able to do these things on our ancestral lands. And so sharing these stories, kind of helping shift that narrative back to what it really is. And you can look up like what is it called? Matriation. You can, I know the Ohlone people right now have a land tax that you can pay to like donate to them. And like, there's a lot of like things that you can do to help, because that money then does go back into like these fights and these like initiatives. Yeah, I don't know how Two-Spirit Identities specifically like would link up into this, but I will say like I think we'll be happy if we just keep California, like everybody else can have the rest of it. Like, but I think we Two-Spirit people want the beaches, so if there does come a time where Two-Spirit people get our own land, I'd take a beach over anything.
Juan or Amelia, do you have anything to add? No, no, nothing to add. Well, I do want to. I do want to move in, since this was sort of brought up. We were talking about land back and everything, and I just wanted to clarify one thing for those who may be non-native. Long time ago, there was this person named Jesus, and he said that when two or more of you gather together, then there I am. That was his saying, and that was supposed to be the standard of what a church is when two or three people gather in his name, then therefore that's the church. Well, we're very different from that in the Native community, in the fact that quite often there are places that for us are sacred. So places are sacred, not just gathering together, but also places are sacred, and that's very important to us. And so when we talk about land back, sometimes we're talking about those sacred sites, those sites that people have enjoyed doing many other things to, but are like sites where we need to pray. And so that's a very important part of the context of land back. Is it's all these things plus sacred places, because we have more sacred places than anything else. It's sacred places. But I just want to go ahead and calmly close out now. We're towards the end. So let's do some last comments. So Amelia, any last things you want to share?
Yeah, thank you. I did want to put people towards, okay, so I was going to talk about this in a kind of more pulled out, specifically to speak to like non-native folks around, like like to support, like I would encourage people to move slower than they want to, because supremacist culture is really heavily urgent, and to have patience with and let the pacing be dictated by whose lands we're on, and to recognize that. And I also wanted to plug an organization in Orange County in the LA area called Sacred Places Institute for Indigenous Peoples, who's working on just that, trying to get back at the state and national level of Tongva, Chumash, and Hashiman territories, and how, to your point, Londa, about what you were saying around sacred places being important in culture. A former Bates community member, or I mean, still is a community, but Joshua Aiden once described to me, and this is his words, that to understand land back and rematriation stuff, to draw a parallel there would be like recognizing a keynote species in our environment. For instance, like if bees just like disappeared, how that would affect community and stabilization of our environment. That's the closeness in Indigenous communities. That's the to the land, in the sense that these aren't just like dirt and bones or whatever. This is like this is within culture, within identity, as significant as keynote species and environments for those who are more science oriented, I guess. That has always stood out to me as such a beautiful metaphor and analogy or parallel around this, to really understand that it is not a dominant culture definition, and to hold in your heart that this is as close as my hands are touching now. So that's all I wanted to add.
Thank you, May. It reminds me of something that my grandfather used to say, which was when a Naholo person, that's somebody that's not native, looks into a field, they see emptiness. But quite often when natives look into the field, they see all the plants and the animals and the herbs and the things that they can survive on and they can use as medicine. So it's a different way of looking at things. And I believe it's true that quite often people look at the fields and stuff, and they see the emptiness and they imagine what could be instead of what actually is. And I think that's an important thing. And that's sort of like, I just felt that when you said it, and I was like, oh, I have to share this one little thought. Thank you. Sam, any last words?
Yeah, I'm finishing writing down exactly what you just said because it was amazing. I think I kind of at the end here want to emphasize that the Two-Spirit community is fighting for a community that doesn't always fight for them. And we're here working so hard to create these Indigenous spaces. We're working towards land back. We're working with No Dapple. We're working with all of these things, even though like Two-Spirit Camp shows up to Standing Rock. And there's some people there guaranteed that aren't going to like that they're there. Like, despite the fact that they're willing and ready to put their bodies on the line for this cause, right? But it doesn't stop us from showing up. And so the strength and tenacity that Two-Spirit people have is different. It's on a whole nother level that most people can't understand. And so, yeah, be kind, be gentle, be understanding of the histories and the energy, and just the sheer energy that goes into like being Two-Spirit in a world that wants you to educate them on everything, and like idolizes this Indigenous identity, and like they all, like I said, like all these people just want to be Indigenous until it matters. And so showing up for your communities is super important, and showing up for your friends and individuals is even more important, I would say. So be kind, love yourself, do your best, thank the land that you are on. Yeah.
Thank you, Sam. Fawn, do you have any final words?
I think I would say, with any and all kind of questions that you have for these things, there's a lot of information on the internet. There's a lot of information in books and literature and things of that sort. And you just be very aware that as much as we are right here talking about this, we too can get tired. So just try to do some work on your own when it comes to questions and wanting to know about these things too. There's no issue with talking to us, asking questions, wanting to know more. But put in a little bit of work for it. We also grow tired.
Thank you, Vaughn. That reminds me of the question when somebody comes up and says, I found out that I had some Native heritage in me. Can you help me? I never know what to say, you know? So I listen. That's the most I can do. And I encourage other people, just listen. Sometimes that's the best route is listen, let them be heard, let them tell you what they want. But anyway, you know, it's Trans Awareness Week. I hope everyone's going to celebrate it in whatever way they're going to celebrate it. I think tomorrow is going to be some big events around the city back there in San Francisco. And I think they just had a big event yesterday in Oakland as well. It was called Transgiving, and that was really nice. And at the same time, at City Hall, there was a celebration of Native American Heritage Month. So everything sort of collides together, and I want to thank our panelists today, and I want to thank the LGBT or the GLBT Historical Society for having us on, so that we can talk a little bit about not only our histories but our current and sometimes our future. And so, if you want to ally with us, we're looking forward to that too. Come on, ally with us, and if you can't give your land back, you can give us some money, right? Same thing goes for the GLBT Historical Society. You can always contribute to them as well. But I wish you well, and I wish you love. Good night from me.
Thank you so much to all four of you for all of your words and your stories and your advice on how people can best support the Indigenous people in our lives. So just like you were saying, Landa, you can support some of the organizations and the links that we put in the chat. You can support, specifically, you can support the Bates Powwow. The Two Spirit Powwow is going to be happening in February. You can go to this link up here, and you can also donate specifically to support the powwow. There's a lot of different expenses, and it's I believe it's a totally volunteer-run endeavor. So, support. That's a perfect and wonderful way to really, throw your support behind this, and making sure that folks have this space that so many of you described as feeling like coming home and being able to be fully yourselves. I thank you all for joining us tonight. I thank everybody who chimed in the chat, and people who are watching tonight, and also folks who will be watching afterwards on the recording. We will be having some more programs going on before the end of the year. You can check them out at glbthistory.org/events. And we also really appreciate feedback from folks who are watching these panels. So I'm going to be putting up a little end screen that will have a feedback survey you can go to. Please let us know what you think about this program, as well as any programs that you'd like to see in the future from the Society. I thank all of you again, and I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend and a safe rest of the month, and happy holidays going into the end of the year, which I can't believe that we're almost at 2022 already. All right. Good night, everyone. Have a good one.